So it is officially the time of the month where I'm going to be doing my wrap up for the month of February. And February was definitely I always say this every single wrap up, it was a very diverse month just because I read a ton of different types of books this month. And I was going through the list and I was like, oh yeah, I can't believe I read that book. Some of the books I honestly just completely forgot about, but we are going to remember them here today. And I'm so excited to share with you the first book that I read in the month of February, which is actually the most February type book that I've read, and it's Love Story by Eric Siegel. So let me just start out by sharing with you the first sentence of the book, which is, what can you say about a 25-year-old girl who died? I just think that's such a good hook, and it left me curious about what was going to happen in the rest of the book. But basically, as the title says, it is a love story. This book follows the main characters, Olive Barrett IV, who is a jock from a WASPy family, and he attends Harvard and he wants to go to law school. And then he meets Jenny Cavallari, who is from a working class family, and she's studying music at Radcliffe, and just talks about their love story and the dynamics of their relationship, as they're both very different personalities and come from very different backgrounds. I really love Jenny as a character because she's such a strong, witty, and funny kind of personality, and it was just really cute to see their dynamic of their relationship. This book really goes into Oliver Barrett's family and his relationship with his dad specifically, and how it's pretty estranged and how he's always had a pretty hard relationship with his father. And I feel like this story is not only a love story between like the boy-girl love story, but it also is the love story between a father and son. It was just so great to see the author explore different types of relationships, and honestly, this book is so short and so sweet. It's only like 150 pages, and yet I feel like the author was like writing a poem where every single word that he used was important, and it was just so beautifully written. The fact that the author was able to write a 150-page story about two characters, which honestly isn't a lot of time to really get to know people, but I was still so captivated by them, and I still was just so immersed in the story. I listened to this book on audio, and it was actually read by the author, and even though the audiobook quality was not well done at all, I just loved hearing it from the author's voice, and I feel like he acted it out in a way that audiobooks just aren't done anymore, just because this is a fairly old book. But I just thought he did such an excellent job with this book. And if you're looking for a romance that is not a huge time commitment but will make you feel something in so many different ways, this book is so good. I actually read this book with a friend. We were buddy reading it together, and we both ended up loving it. But it was just, if that hook doesn't hook you, I don't know what will. And then the very end of the book was just so heartwarming. I think it also ended on a really beautiful sentence as well, which I obviously will not share with you. But this book was a clear 5 out of 5 stars. I really loved it. Not only did I love the book itself, but I thought it was so cool that it was set on a college campus. So it was primarily set at Harvard, which I really liked. And you kind of followed the main characters through the years. But yeah, this was definitely probably one of my favorite books that I read in the month of February. So when I was looking at my Goodreads for the books that I read in February, I honestly totally forgot that I read this book, which I feel really bad about, but it is Finding Flow, The Psychology of Engagement with Everyday Life by Heya Csikszentmihalyi. And the author is a psychologist, and basically what this book is about is being in your flow state. So it's kind of like, I guess the way to describe that is if you're an Olympian, or if you're in the zone, or you're hyper focused on whatever you're doing, you obviously get more enjoyment out of that activity because you're fully immersed in the process instead of having anxiety and stress about other things. And the reason why I picked this book up in the first place is because I personally want to be better at focusing. I want to be better at finding flow states where I'm able to focus on a particular activity or thing and just be totally immersed in that moment. Books is a great example of that, just being able to read a book and not having a ton of stressors. I don't know why, I just didn't connect with this book as much as I thought I would, so I listened to this book on audio. He does have another book that's out, and that book didn't come in an audio format, and that was more his famous work, so I decided to pick this one up because it's on the same subject, but this book really talked more about leisure time and creativity. And the thing that I did pick up from this book was that people actually get more enjoyment out of accomplishing tasks than they do out of leisure. So for example, people get more pleasure out of like playing the piano than they would from watching TV mindlessly, which obviously I thought was interesting. But I don't know, like I just totally forgot about this book, and it's just not something I think about a lot. It is a little bit older, and just because I've read a lot of nonfiction, I feel like a lot of the things and studies that he was like telling me, I just like didn't think were so revolutionary, just because I'd heard them before in other books. But I mean, I think the concept is really interesting. I just don't know if I would have to read an entire book about it. I've been learning with nonfiction that some nonfiction topics, you can just like read a blog post about it. You don't actually have to read a whole book about it. I just feel like as a reader, I'm like, oh, there's a book about it, I have to read it. And then I'm like, okay, that could have been condensed like a lot. But anyway, I think I give this book a 3 out of 5 stars just to be nice. It wasn't a bad book by any means, but yeah, I don't really have any strong opinions about it. So the next book that I read was Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami, which is the first Murakami book that I've ever read. And this book is about Toru, who is a quiet college student who is in love with Naoko, and they are connected because Naoko dated Toru's best friend in high school, but he committed suicide, and then after that they kind of lost touch and then reconnected in college when they ran into each other, and he is in love with her, but then she struggles with mental illness from not only the death of her boyfriend but also other things that have happened in her past, and then she goes off to a place where she can get help with her mental health. And then over time, Toru also meets this other woman who is in college. He meets her in a college class, and it's kind of like a little bit love triangle-y. What I will say about this book that I did like, I loved the 60s references. I mean, I'm a huge 60s fan, the Beatles. The fact that this book was named after a Beatles song, I mean, and there were so many Beatles references. It was very well done. Also, let me just list the positives. The writing in this book was absolutely beautiful. Murakami has a way of just really capturing emotion, and it just made me really want to go to Japan. He just painted the scenery so well. I can't even like explain to you how he wrote. It was just so beautiful. It was like he was writing a poem, but it was like written out into like a novel, like if that's the best way that I can describe it. But I don't know what it was about this book, but like when I first started reading it, I was like, this is a clear 5 out of 5 stars. It's so beautifully done. I liked obviously the aspects that they talked about mental illness. But for some reason, like towards the end of the book, I just got so lost. Like it was just really losing me, and I just got kind of slumpy. I'm not really sure what it was. My favorite scene of the book was there was this really long chapter where Toru goes to this like the place where Naoko is getting help for her mental health, and I really liked that. I thought that was really interesting to see what her day-to-day life was and see how their relationship was kind of evolving over that time. And they'd also send each other letters when they weren't together, and then obviously when they were together their relationship would evolve. And then he met Raiko, who is Naoko's mentor at the mental health facility. I don't know the actual name of it. So I really liked that scene. It was like a really, really long chapter, and I just liked him interacting with the two women and just them like sitting and like singing Beatles songs, and it was just really nice. And then obviously him exploring his relationship with Naoko. But then when he wasn't with Naoko, he was also exploring his relationship with Midori, which I honestly just like wasn't as interested with his relationship with her. It just didn't interest me as much as him and Naoko, because this book I thought was about unrequited love, and I don't know why like the love triangle thing like just wasn't really working for me. I don't generally like that in romance books. I don't really know who does. I mean, I don't know anyone who'd be like, oh my god, a love triangle, like I want to pick up that book. Unless that's your thing, let me know. But and also at the end, his relationship with Raiko was so unnecessary. I just like did not understand how that evolved. It was like really kind of gross in my opinion. But anyway, I don't know, I just got totally like lost at the end. So I think I originally gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars because I felt bad like giving this book a bad rating, because it's so well loved, it's so well written, and it's not a bad book by any means. I just like connected with it at first, and then I just got really lost, and then at the end I was like, I don't know. The end was definitely pretty impactful though, except like the very, very end. So it was like, okay. But anyway, yeah, I'm just gonna say 3 or 4 stars. Like, I don't think it actually matters if I give it like a solid rating, but yeah, it was kind of a miss for me. The next book that I finished was on audio, and it was Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. So this book is about Enchanted Jones, who is an aspiring singer. She goes to the singing competition where she meets Corey Fields, and who's like this very popular like pop star at the time, and he kind of takes her under his wing and tries to mentor her. He's basically grooming her so that he can control her life, and basically like kidnaps her from her parents and abuses her sexually and also physically. And it really is kind of a fictional tale of what was happening with R. Kelly and that whole story. So when I was first reading this book, first of all, the audiobook was so amazing. I was like, this is a 5 out of 5 stars. It's so incredible. I thought this book really did a good job with talking about grooming and also just talking about the experience of what it's like to go through the things that Enchanted went through, which obviously there's a lot of trigger warnings with that. And it really did like read as a contemporary novel, and I thought it was so well done, and I was so immersed in the story, and I was like really wondering what was going to happen next. So I'm just like really sad that I don't have as much praise for it, because I did love it so much. And then the end happened, and I was just like, it just didn't really work for me. So as I said, I thought this book read like a contemporary, and then all of a sudden, like the last, I don't know, third or quarter of the book, it kind of just switched to a thriller. And I was just like, I don't want a thriller. Like, I want this to continue with the contemporary story. And I knew it kind of like had the thriller elements. Like, there'd be like teeny little clues that it was a thriller, and then the very end, it was just like a total like plot twist. And I was like, I just don't do well with thrillers. It didn't really work for me. If the book ended differently, I would have totally given it a 5 out of 5 stars. But I have to give it a 4 and like knock off a star just because of the ending. I don't even like remember what happened at the end, because I was so confused with her and her friend. And then the very last sentence, I was just like, what? Like, which makes me so sad, because this book had like the potential to be so good, like 5 out of 5, and then it just totally lost me. But it is an incredible read. Aside from that, I mean, honestly, like, even if I would honestly still recommend this book, even though I didn't love like the very last part of the book, it's still really, really good. And the audiobook, as I said, was amazing. And so it was just very well done. But yeah, I'm sad to say that I will be giving this book a 4 out of 5 stars. So the next book that I finished was actually a poetry collection, which is Homebody by Rupi Kaur. So I read all of her poetry collections. I read Milk and Honey and The Sun and Her Flowers, and this obviously is her latest book. It actually recently came out in the past few months, and I wanted to give it a read. So I like her poetry. I know that some people, like, I've heard critiques that it just is like Instagram poetry, and like I get it, but also I don't know, like I think it's a light read, meaning obviously it's an easy read to get through because it's a poetry collection, but it touches on very hard topics. Like, it talks about sexual assault, it talks about self-love, anxiety, depression, all that kind of stuff. And I liked it. Obviously I connected with some poems more than others. My favorite poems were the ones that were about anxiety when it comes to productivity, and the feelings of like regret or remorse, or feelings of like not being good enough because you didn't get enough done. So I really liked those poems. Obviously, like, everyone's going to connect to different poems depending on, you know, what you've experienced in your life. But I don't think I gave this book a rating because, again, it's like a poetry collection. I don't really know how to rate it, but I mean, it's a really good starter to poetry. If you're like, I don't like poetry, I don't know how to read poetry, this is pretty simple, just because I've read poetry in the past that's so complex and hard to understand, and it's like poetry that you actually like need to read in a class so that you can have a teacher advise you on how to read it and what to look for. These poems are pretty standard, or easy to read, meaning like they use like standard language and they tell a story and it's like not as convoluted. But yeah, I guess this book was good. I definitely will remember the poems that I liked, and the others I probably won't remember as much. So the next book that I read was The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie McKeesey. So this book is, I don't know if it's like a children's book, but in the book it says that it can be read by an 8-year-old or an 80-year-old, and this book is a picture book. But I picked it up because I'd seen other people on BookTube rave about it, and I was really curious to know what the hype was. So this book is about a boy who meets his 3 friends, the mole, the fox, and the horse, and it's about finding hope during uncertain times, and it's honestly just so endearing. If you have a best friend and you're looking for a present for them, this book is the perfect present because it's all about friendship. And it's just really nice, especially now, just because these times that we're living in are so uncertain. And I don't know, it was just like very heartwarming. There's like a lot of little life lessons along the way, and they're all very simple because obviously a child can understand them or an 80-year-old can understand them, and it's really for everyone. And it's just really cute to, see the little interactions that the boy had with his friends, and it kind of reminded me of the books that I used to read when I was little, which I obviously don't read picture books anymore, but it was kind of nice to read this book and be reminded of that. So I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars. It's a really cute read. It'll only take you 20 minutes. I got it from the library. And the illustrations, I didn't even mention. The illustrations are really beautiful. So it's kind of similar to the one on the front, and then they also have like other like watercolor type illustrations and all different types, and it's like very whimsical and magical looking, but it was definitely a very, very cute read. So I just realized I haven't been holding up any books because all the books that I've read this month have either been on audio or I got them from the library and I had to return them before this video. But I actually do own this book, which is Pet Sematary by Stephen King. I just finished this book the other day, and it's a Stephen King book that I've been wanting to read for a while and I've been putting off, and I am definitely glad that I ended up picking it up. So this book is about Louis Creed, who is a physician, and he gets a job to work at a college in Maine. Shocker, right? And he moves his family there, so his wife Rachel and his kids Ellie and Gage. And across the street lives an old man named Judd, who becomes almost like a father figure to Louis, who lost his father when he was really young. And Judd shows him Pet Sematary. So Pet Sematary is this place in the woods, like beyond Louis's house. They have to like kind of take a little hike to get up there. And it's a place where kids used to go to bury their animals, and they would come back to life, or their pets, I should say. I also forgot to mention their pet cat church, which obviously is a big part of the book considering the cover has a cat on it. I don't know what I'm supposed to say about this book because I feel like the major plot points are kind of spoilers, and I went into this book not knowing anything, and I kind of feel like you should too if you're gonna read the book. A lot of crazy things happen over the course of the book, and I just feel like it's more fun to actually learn about it as you're reading it. But I really liked this book. This book really touches on grief and death and what death means, obviously, because Pet Sematary is all about bringing your pets back to life, but then also the consequences that go with that, and is it worth the consequences to bring your beloved pet back to life. And the end of this book was so good. I mean, I know Stephen King is not known for his endings, but the end of this book was exceptionally really good. And I was a little bit confused with Judd as a character. I still honestly have some questions about him, and I really would like to learn more about him. But literally the very, very last scene was just totally full circle and just made the story totally make sense. I mean, obviously, if you haven't read this book, this won't make any sense to you, but it was just such a satisfying ending. And it left a lot of open-ended questions, but I kind of like that in books. But it was just really good. And if you're looking for a Stephen King book, I would recommend this one. I think I gave this one a 4.25 stars just because the first Stephen King book that I read this year was The Shining, and I think that might have tainted me for Stephen King in the future because The Shining was a total 5 out of 5 stars and I loved it. I don't think this book is as good as The Shining, and I think The Shining, to me, it's a little bit more complex than the story, but this is definitely up there with top Stephen King books. I mean, I think this was the 6th book that I read by him, but definitely a worthwhile and amazing read. The last book that I read this month, which I actually just finished a couple hours ago, is Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus by John Gray. This is a very famous and well-known relationship book, advice book. So I decided to give it a shot because, that's kind of my thing. And I've been reading a lot of relationship self-help books, and this book I had never read before, so I decided to give it a try. So this book was basically not targeted for someone like me. This is kind of a book that's more geared towards people that are married and resent their partner, to be honest. Like they've been married for like 10, 15 years and they're like with their partner. So this book I kind of was like really torn with on like how I would give it a rating, because even though it wasn't really targeted towards me, I did pick up some things from it that I can apply in my current, relationship and then also in the future. But this book really goes into the communication styles or the differences between men and women, and obviously that deals a lot with communication. So it can be anywhere from like expressing love, how you deal with emotions, how to deal with conflict, like that kind of thing. And he gives like advice on how to deal with the ways in which women and men deal with those things differently. So when I was going through some of the like reviews on Goodreads, which it wasn't shocking, like obviously people thought the book was really sexist because he was making broad generalizations about men and women. And I can honestly, I see the point, and I don't want to like totally go into that, but I definitely see their points. The thing with the book though is that he even says it at the very beginning. I mean, men and women are more complicated. It's not like all men are one way and all women are the other way. Like it's very fluid, and so some women might have more like male stereotypes, and then some men might have some woman stereotypes, and it's kind of just like you take it with a grain of salt, I guess. I do kind of get the criticism. Also, I mean, honestly, what bothered me more than that was, I think, like, the only sexist thing that kind of stood out to me that I really didn't like was, like, it always seemed like the man was at work and the woman was at home, like, fixing the house. And I was like, this book isn't even that old. So I was just like, I don't know. I was just like, okay, come on. Like, women have jobs too. And, like, you can have more examples where, yeah, some women are homemakers, some women have jobs, some men are homemakers. Like, it doesn't always have to be like one or the other. But the reason why I gave this book a 3 out of 5 stars is because I thought it was incredibly repetitive, like insanely repetitive. And he'd give an example, but instead of giving it 1 or 2 times, he would give it like 20 times, and it was just like completely unnecessary. And I thought this book, honestly, this is what I was talking about. This book could be a blog article. Like, you don't need to read this whole book in order to understand how to better communicate with your partner. Like, there were times where I was like, oh my God, you've already said this. Like, why are we saying this again? It was crazy. I did learn from it, as I said, so I did pick up some things that I can enact in my own life. Obviously, this book is really talking more about the male-female relationship, even though, again, like, there were some points of the book where I felt like I identified more with the male than I didn't as he was describing the female. But again, you take it with a grain of salt, and I just kind of identify with whatever made sense to me. So aside from that, yeah, like, I thought some of the advice was pretty good. Again, he could have said it once, he didn't have to say it a million times. And there's even been things that I've like picked up that I've even used in my own like relationship and life today. But it's the thing about books is, like, this book kind of like rubbed me the wrong way at certain points, and it was just like kind of annoying. But then the very end of the book, like, his outro was so freaking good. I was like, this should have been not only the intro of your book, but you should have focused more on this. Like, he was, okay, which I know was not the point of the entire book, was more about, like, the differences between men and women. But in his outro, he started talking about how a lot of the times that when we're annoyed or get angry at our partner, it's really because of past hurt that we've had either in our childhood or from our parents. And I was like, okay, which I know can be its own book in and of itself, but I was like, that, I wish he touched on that more, because that is so true. Like, a lot of the root cause of why we, our insecurities or our arguments or whatever are not always like what's right in front of us. They go a little bit deeper. And another thing that he mentioned, which I also wish he touched on more, was the like seasons of being in a relationship. And he was like he was kind of like talking about like spring, summer, fall, winter. That was not the right order. But and kind of like how relationships go through different seasons, which again I think is also like really important to know. And I thought that was an interesting point, and he kind of just touched on it, but I was like, you could have incorporated that a little bit more too. And I honestly think that John Gray, the author, had really good intentions with this book. I can see why it's a miss for people. I totally get that. I think that it can help certain people with relationships, especially if you identify with the male-female stereotypes. Then yeah, again, like, men and women are more complicated than that, but I still think there is some value in this book, and that is why I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. Finally, made it until the end of this video. So I am done with all the books that I read in February. Let me know if you have read any of the books that I have. I know some are like incredibly popular, like Pet Sematary. Others are like, I've never heard of that, which I don't blame you, honestly. But let me know if you've read any of the books that I've read, or what your, as I've always say, what's your favorite and least favorite book in February? Did you read a romance in February? Because honestly, I've been really craving a romance book, and Love Story was the only one that I read because the library does not give me the books that I want. I have all these romance books on hold, and anyway, I did not get to read them in February. But yeah, let me know in the comments down below. But thank you so much for getting all the way until the end of this video. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you guys in the next one.